You have won every fight you've ever been in. Not most. Every single one. 60 times, someone has stood across from you wanting you dead, and 60 times you walked away and they didn't. Now imagine the 61st time never comes. Not because you lost, because you refused to show up. That is the strange, quiet ending of Miyamoto Musashi's life. And the real answer to why he stopped is far stranger than you'd expect. Picture Japan in the early 1600s. The country has just finished tearing itself apart. Warlords, castles, decades of civil war. Then peace arrives, sudden and total, under a new shogunate. For most former warriors, this is a relief. For Musashi, it's something closer to a problem. He was built for a world that no longer exists. And somehow, that's exactly when he becomes untouchable. By his late 20s, Musashi has already fought and won duels most swordsmen only hear about. Age 13, his first kill. A grown man, a real duel, no ceremony. By 29, he faces the Yoshioka school, one of the most respected sword lineages in Kyoto, and by most accounts dismantles it across 3 separate confrontations. He fights against real swords, wooden swords, even in or he carved down while rowing to the island where his most famous duel took place. He never loses. Not once. So here's the question that should stop you cold. If you were the single most dangerous swordsman in the country, with a flawless record and a reputation that made men's hands shake before you even arrived, what would you do next? Most people assume the answer is obvious. Keep fighting. Build the legend higher. Take the next challenger and the one after that. But Musashi does the opposite. Somewhere in his 30s, he simply stops. He stops accepting formal duels to the death. He starts wandering instead. Painting, writing, studying Zen, carving small wooden statues. The man who once carved a sword from an or now carves birds. To understand why, you have to understand something about mastery that modern psychology only formally described centuries later. Researcher K. Anders Ericsson, known for his work on expert performance, spent decades studying what separates true masters from everyone else in a skill. One of his findings keeps surfacing across chess, music, and combat sports alike. The closer someone gets to the ceiling of a skill, the less the skill itself is the point. Mastery stops being about winning individual contests. It becomes about refining something internal that external contests can no longer measure. Musashi seems to have understood this instinctively, 300 years before anyone put a name to it. Winning duel number 40 didn't teach him anything duel number 20 hadn't already shown him. The information stopped coming. What was left to learn wasn't in another man's sword. It was somewhere else entirely. There's a second piece to this, and it's darker. Historian and translator William Scott Wilson, who spent years studying Musashi's writings and the world he moved through, describes a man increasingly detached from the violence that made him famous, not because he feared it, but because he'd extracted everything from it that mattered. Each duel wasn't really a fight against another person anymore. It was a fight against Musashi's own hesitation, his own fear, his own mind. Once he'd defeated that consistently enough, the actual opponent became almost irrelevant, a formality standing between him and the next quiet morning. Think about what that means. He wasn't retiring because he was tired of winning. He was retiring because winning had quietly become meaningless. There's research on this pattern outside of swordsmanship too. Psychologists studying elite competitors, from chess grandmasters to combat athletes, have documented a phenomenon sometimes called goal habituation, where a repeated victory produces a smaller and smaller emotional payoff each time. Neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz's work on dopamine and reward prediction helped explain the mechanism behind this decades later. Your brain doesn't reward you for the outcome you expected. It rewards you for the outcome that surprises you. Beat the same kind of opponent enough times, in enough similar ways, and your own mind stops treating the win as a reward at all. It becomes routine, and routine, to a brain built for survival, is invisible. Musashi's 60 wins weren't 60 separate thrills. By the end, they were most likely 60 repetitions of the same diminishing return. But here's the twist, and it's the part most people miss. Musashi didn't just get bored of fighting. He got afraid of what fighting was starting to cost him. In his own writing, The Book of Five Rings, composed near the very end of his life, he barely talks about swordsmanship as violence at all. He talks about it as a mirror, a way of seeing your own mind clearly under pressure. And a man who has looked into that mirror 60 times starts to notice things about himself he didn't expect to find. Some historians believe Musashi grew genuinely uneasy with how easily death came to him. Not because he doubted his skill, but because he no longer felt the weight he once did. Killing had become efficient, familiar. And a version of yourself that finds violence familiar is not a version most people, even legendary swordsmen, want to keep meeting. So he walked away, not in defeat, in something closer to self-preservation. Now here's where this stops being a story about a 17th century Japanese swordsman and starts being a story about you. You do this too, not with swords, with something quieter. Maybe it's an argument you've won so many times you no longer even feel it when you win. Maybe it's a habit, a competition, a relationship dynamic you've mastered so thoroughly that the outcome stopped surprising you years ago. Psychologists call this the hedonic treadmill, first named by researchers Philip Brickman and Donald Campbell, describing how humans adapt to repeated rewards until those rewards stop registering as rewards at all. You chase the next win, expecting it to feel like the first one did. It never does. And somewhere along the way, without noticing, you might be doing exactly what Musashi did, fighting battles your mind has already stopped learning from. The difference is, Musashi noticed. Most people never do. They keep swinging at contests that used to matter, chasing a feeling that quietly left the building years ago, mistaking motion for meaning. Musashi spent his final years in a cave near Kumamoto, writing, painting ink brush portraits of birds and monks, refining a philosophy that had nothing left to prove to anyone. He died in 1645, not in a duel, not with a blade in his hand, but of illness, in stillness, surrounded by the quiet he'd spent decades earning. The deadliest swordsman in Japan didn't stop fighting because he got weaker. He stopped because he finally understood what he'd been fighting for all along, and it was never really the other man across the field. So here's the real question worth sitting with. What fight are you still showing up for, long after it stopped teaching you anything? And what would it look like to finally, quietly, put the sword down?
If you're feeling lost or sad, I just want you to know you're not alone. A lot of people feel this way even if they don't show it. You don't need to have everything figured out today. Just take one small step at a time. Be kind to yourself. You are enough just as you are.